Ever wish you could add drag and drop functionality to your AJAX applications? Well, stay tuned and I'll show you how. It's easier than you think. In the previous recordings, we created this to-do list where we have dynamic actions to check or uncheck our to-do elements, and we can click our add to-do button to get a modal window and add something new. Now we're going to implement drag and drop so that we can grab one of these to-do elements and just move them around and resort them. This is a little bit slow today. So the idea is for us to be able to grab this element and drag it and change position. I'm going to be following steps that I've outlined in this blog post. It's actually fairly straightforward to do. We're just a few steps. We're going to add a jQuery UI library that already ships with our AJAX installation. If you're in AJAX 4.2, you will use this library. If you're in AJAX 5 or 5.1, you'll be able to use this library. I don't know if 5.1 will change on the final release, but as of right now, this library works. And then we're going to make our area sortable. Then we're going to specify what to do when the sort order changes. And along with that, we're going to have an AJAX callback to reorder the elements. Additionally, here's a little stuff that we'll do when we're working with a standard classic report. So I'm also going to show you how to add drag and drop functionality to a standard classic report, because that may be the most common thing you do. So first thing we're going to do is go to our application properties. I'm going to grab that library I talked about, and that is right here. And let's see, there's I'm just gonna select it, copy. I'm going into my JavaScript file URL and paste it. Make sure I don't have that number as part of it. And the other thing we're gonna do is our to-do list report. We're gonna give it a unique name, a static ID, so that it gets a unique name to the whole region. And this may be optional, but it's nice to know that I'm grabbing my to-do region, and I'm gonna say which one I'm adding drag and drop functionality to. This is just to target exactly the one we want. Let's have a little refresher here. I'm gonna run the page. If I do an inspect of these elements, remember that these elements are, in the end, they're LI elements. See, as I hover, how those are changing? What we want is to change a whole LI is going to change places with another. Our unique ID is right here, to do region, the one we just added. However, what we're really going to work on is the UL, the whole UL, and in particular, we want the LIs. The other thing we want to do is uniquely identify each LI. We know that each of those elements, if I keep toggling them open, each of those elements, there's this data ID with the ID of the element. Well, we want that ID. I'm actually going to modify the template to place this data ID at the LI level, just to make it really straightforward, very simple to understand which ID element I'm moving around. So next step here is to make our report sortable. I'm going to grab this code and then I'm going to explain it. We're going to create a dynamic action on page load. On page load, make region sortable. the true action is actually going to be a JavaScript code. I am not going to specify affected elements, although actually maybe a better way to do this is to specify which region we're making affected element. However, right now, just to not complicate things, I'm just going to say we're targeting this to do region. Actually, we should do our so this ID would be optional if we do affected elements. So we're gonna say this affected elements, and we really want the first one. I think that would be the correct notation to get the first affected element. And then within the affected element, which is going to be our region, we're gonna find the UL, and then we're gonna say that UL is gonna be sortable. Sortable is gonna be the terminology we want within that jQuery UI library. And what elements are sortable? Well, the LIs. So if we look at this again, we find the UL, the whole UL is sortable, but the elements that we're sorting are the LI elements. And the containment region means it's an optional parameter that says how far can you drag things, or are they contained within some element? And yeah, in this case, we're gonna contain it within the region, so that they don't move away. Now, when you sort something, what's gonna be our update? Well, our update would be to call this update display sequence function, which we haven't created. This is our very own function, and that function is going to handle the updates. Now I can save this, make sure we have an affected element to be the region, and our region is our to-do list. Save this, run it, make sure I don't have any errors. Great. So at this point, look at this. I can already drag and drop things, but if I drop it, I'm going to get the error that update display sequence is not defined, which is perfectly correct. We have not defined that. So far, we've done a lot. And then if I try to drag this away from this region, look, it gets blocked. It cannot go any further than that because of that containment setting. You can play with different settings to see what works for you. Great. So now it's sortable. Let's go back to the blog post. We made it sortable. Now, before we move forward, we're going to modify our LI elements to include our ID within the LI, right? So that we can uniquely identify which element we are dragging. So I'm going into attributes. Here's our template. I'm going to edit the component. I'm going to find the LI element. And I'm going to add a data ID equal to ID. Now, notice I don't want to say that this ID equal the ID. And that's because in HTML, IDs of elements cannot be simply numeric. They need to start with a letter. So we could concatenate this with something like lines and underscore, but then we gotta split the lines and split the number. I kind of like just saying data dash ID. So now it's a data set value, which can be anything we want, and it doesn't break or cause any problems with our valid HTML. I'm going to save this. If we run the page at this point and inspect our LIs, you can see now that our LIs have the IDs of our to-do lines. All right. So I did that as a prerequisite because this next step of code, this next portion of code I'm going to place it here to explain it a little bit better. This next code is what gets called when we drag something. What are we going to do to change the order? So what we're going to do is find the ULs, and this actually needs to be a little bit more specific because there could be other ULs on the page, so we don't want all of them. We are going to say our ULs that are part of this app to do class, and that's for this scenario our app to do class. We're gonna call this built-in jQuery UI function with the parameter of toArray. toArray is the function within sortable, and that's gonna return, that is really interesting, it's gonna return an array of our sortable elements. So let's just run this on its own here on the console. I do need to specify the toArray. toArray. And all right, let's see. Okay, toArray, but we want to specify what attribute we want to get back. But it did find 3 elements. All right. If we run this, there it is. We get a 41. We get an array of our 3 elements in the order that we've placed them. If I move cookies, which is 101, I move it to the top. I do get an error, but I can still call this, and now I'm going to get 101 as the first element, 41, and then 42. Okay? Now, you'll notice that then there's a toString. I'm going to turn this array into a string, toString, before I send it over to our AJAX call. And that just makes it a comma delimited list of IDs. So there's that. Then we're going to call Apex server process, which, as you know, is going to make an AJAX call. We're going to have to create a process called update order, and we're going to pass into x01. We're going to pass our results, which is our comma delimited list of IDs. And then on success, if we're able to, if this is correct and we did our update, we're going to trigger an Apex refresh, which will refresh our report. Now, optionally, this line was to call the old Oracle notification plugin that came before Apex 5. Now it's been removed, but it used to be on the sample application, I believe. And it used a library called Gritter. And maybe we'll use pnotify to do a notification, but I thought it would be nice that when the update happens, if it's good, to show a little notification on the screen to let the user know that it was successful. All right, so this function is ready, and we're gonna add it to our page. This doesn't go on a dynamic action. We simply go into functions and global variables declaration and paste it there. Now remember, we need to create this update order. I'm going to save this, run this. So far, if I move things, now I'm going to have an AJAX error. Well, I didn't see the error, but you can see how it refreshes again. And I lost my ability to reorder, right? That's because I made a little mistake. We said that on page load, we're going to make our region sortable. Instead of on page load, we're going to do it after refresh. After refresh of our region, after refresh of our to-do region. So whenever our to-do region refreshes, we're going to make it sortable again. Does that make sense? Now, if I just leave this, well, there it is. Fire and page load is the default of yes. So when the page loads, if this was no, let's save it as no. I believe that our page, our region will not, our code, it's not sortable. So we want this to run on page load. We're gonna fire on page load, and then it's gonna fire every time we refresh our region. All right, sort, it refreshes, and now we can keep on sorting. All right, now when it refreshes, it goes back to the original because we have not updated the order yet. So let's do that now. Our next step is to have a little bit of PL SQL code here. Oops, let's select it correctly. We're going to receive an array. Well, we're actually receiving our x01, right? That's because we specify x01 here is receiving our results, and it's a comma delimited list. So we're going to use string to table to parse it and separate all the comma IDs back into an array. Then we're going to loop through the array. We're going to update our app to do table. We're going to change the display sequence. Here's a trick I'm doing, right? Our array, it's going to be in the new order we wish. So all I gotta do is set our display sequence to be in that sequence, in that order. So I'm going element by element of the array and just setting our display sequence from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. I'm just multiplying by 10 so they look nicer in case I manually edit them. So they're going to be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, right? And at the end, I'm going to return a JSON looking thing so that I can have a better error validation, which, to be honest, right now, I am not using it. But this code, if I go look at the function, we have a process called update order. So we're going to create an AJAX callback called exactly update order. And in the PL SQL code, we're going to paste that. And if I didn't make any mistakes, we have a sortable to-do list. I'm going to drag orange juice to the top. And now if we drag them, something went wrong. Something's not quite right. I'm going to my network. I'm going to drag cookies and see what happens. Here, we are submitting in x01. This is very hard to do because it's all the way at the end, all the way at the bottom of the page, but hopefully you can see it. I have my new order. An update order is my AJAX callback. Yep, update order. Great. And I got an OK back. So that's strange. Let's look at the code again. Yeah, if it fails, it would return something different. So maybe we want to have an exception. And we're going to say error. And of course, we can do a better job here saying what type of error. But let's put this in place. Save it. Run it. Let's make this smaller. Oh, I can see that this plugin is my problem with the speed. All right, turned off. That's why it was slow. All right, let's clear this. Cookies to the middle. Well, right now I'm suspecting that I don't have, see, my result was okay. So right now I'm suspecting that I don't have an order by on my report. And that's a great lesson. Let me open our, yeah, exactly. Oh, that's terrible. Order by display sequence. Okay, so it's been working all along. Just, I'm not seeing my end result because I'm not ordering, not controlling my display sequence. There you go. So, refreshes, still not working. What's going on? Let's troubleshoot this. I'm going to concatenate in our just to do a quick troubleshooting here. I'm going to place a parentheses, concatenate with display sequence, concatenate with another parentheses, and make sure my column's still called to do. Save it, run it. Okay. Display sequence. Okay, I think I know the bug. The bug is that my display sequences are null. We started with null values. So, as we know, if we change a null value to something, it's not gonna matter. So, I'm just gonna do a simple update statement. Gonna go to a SQL commands, update app to do set display sequence to, you know, I'm just gonna set it to the IDs. That's gonna be good enough for now. 3 rows updated, great. So if I refresh this, I should now have IDs here. All right, so cookies to the top, cookies should become 10. There it goes, 10, 20, 30. Great. Orange juice to the middle, that becomes 20. There it is, 20. Great. All right, let's edit our report again just to make sure, just to remove that that display sequence debug value that we added here. At this point, we're done. We have a sortable, drag and drop sortable entries. We can still click the elements to sort them. I did not expose the display sequence here, but this would be your fallback. The fallback is to have the display sequence field in the window that opens so that people can manually change that value. I don't have it exposed, but that would be usually that may be a good thing to do, because drag and drop may not work correctly on touch devices like your Androids, your tablets, your iPhones, without adding other libraries and some other code to make it happen. So the final step we're gonna do, let me undo this now. Save this. All right, so the final thing we're gonna do is let's do the same thing with a classic report. So right now we have this classic report, and I set it to collapsible and close by default. Collapse, I'm gonna set it to expanded so that we can work better with it. Normally, with our classic report, we're gonna have an ID column that's gonna be used for our edit link. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna set this to be our edit link, just to replicate this better. The page, I believe, is 210. No, 201. So I set it to 201. 201 is our ID column. And our link text would be some pencil. And I'm going to include our data ID pound ID here in our link. Save this, run it. So now we're concentrating on the classic report, which is not sortable right now. Okay, if I actually, I'm not going to edit. I'm going to inspect. If I inspect this, well, that seemed to be working. But if I inspect it, we can see that we get an anchor that has a date ID with the ID we want. Okay, and the header for this is ID. That's important because if I go back to the blog post, we're going to do this extra. Select it all. Copy. Nope. Go back to Sublime. Paste it. This is JavaScript code. Here's what this code is. We had a function, a update display sequence function, but our make sortable function. Let's see, when we were making the sortable, let's look at that. This make region sortable. This is all we're running because we already have UL elements and LIs. This is going to change because now our elements are not UL elements. Now they're part of a table. So if we look at the new code, we kind of have to find a report with the region. We have to find a report, and once we find a report, we're going to find all those headers with an ID and their anchors. Let me go examine this again. Here's a header with ID. Here's an anchor. And for each one of them, we're going to grab the ID and we're going to grab that data ID and add an ID element to each one of them. And actually, let me explain this better. For each table row, we're going to add a dataset attribute. I'm sorry, this is an attribute ID, and I actually want this to be a data ID. We're going to add a data ID element to each of the table rows. What does that mean? We're not sorting the TDs. We're sorting the TRs. So just like we added IDs to each of the LIs, I want to add the IDs to each of these TRs. And that's what this line of code will do. We'll add a TR, we'll add a data ID to each one of the TRs. Let's see. This should work fairly well, actually. So our P region, we need to give it a name. We're going to our classic report, and the static ID for this guy. Oh, and before I forget, order by display sequence. The static ID, instead of just app to do classic, we're gonna call it app to do classic. So if we wanted to test this out, we're going to use we're gonna test this. That's app to do classic. Great. So what is that element? Let's see. $R. App to do classic. Oh, I need to refresh this page. My bad. Did I not save that? No, app to do classic. I didn't save it. I still had the generated IDs. There. Now, that is our report. So if I double click on that, that drills into our, let me scroll down so we see the correct one. That is our report, okay? At least those classes are correct for Apex 5, or I'm sorry, for the universal theme. And the next step is then to find all of our ID elements. So let's run this. Paste that there. And we find 1, 2, and 3. These 3 anchor elements. That's what those 3 are. So we're getting somewhere with this. And then I'm going to modify the parent of each of those anchors, the TR anchor, and we're going to add a data set with ID. So I'm actually going to run this whole code as is. Missing a semicolon there. And before I do, let me show you here. Our TRs look like this. They don't have IDs. What we want is to add an ID to them. So I'm going to run this code. And if I go back to my elements, they did not quite work. Let's troubleshoot this real quick. Console log. This should print our anchors. There you go. All our anchors are being printed. Now instead of just the anchors, data ID. And I forgot to close the console log. Great. Here's IIDs. 101, 42, and 41. Great. So far, so good. So now, the question is, am I finding the right elements with this? I think I am. Nope, object 0. That tells me right away that, yeah, it created some elements there, but it didn't find anything. So let's come up with the correct one. I'm finding this guy. I really want to go up and up. So maybe I just do 2 parents. So parents, parent, and parent. And those are our TR elements. Great. See how I hover over that 0 and it highlights that TR. All right. I think that's our solution. I hope I'm not getting you lost with this. So, oh, I switched to the wrong one. So now let's fix this. Let's duplicate this line, comment it out. Parent, parent, our elements still don't have the IDs there. So I'm going to paste the new code, run it, go back to the elements. No, I'm still not there. What am I doing wrong? Parent data. Maybe still the attribute ID. There it is. Okay, so I need a slightly different format. Finally, what I did is I found the ID on the edit TD here on the anchor. I find the ID from there, and I want to add that to our TR. But as I said, I don't want to add it as ID equal because that is bad form. Those IDs may not be, are not valid. So what I really want is to add it as a data set. And I think what we're going to do is going to add an attribute that is data-ID. Let me refresh this page. I go to the console. Actually, let's go to the elements. Inspect. Our TRs don't have IDs. I'm gonna paste this. Oh, of course now I don't have my R defined. There's my R. And now I can run this code and go to my elements. And there it is, data ID. All right, you see what I had to do? I just had to set an attribute called data-ID. That's the correct syntax. Finally, all right. So this is our code. Now I can find within that that report, I can find my table report. Let's see. Let's run this. No. So $R is this guy. I need to find this table. All right. We need this T report. T report. That's the correct guy. So I'm gonna find that. Let's run this. I think the problem is I had this set for a different theme. I think theme 26. So you may have to adjust your selectors. But once I find that, there it is. Once I find that guy, then I can make the TRs sortable. So I find that guy and I can make the TRs sortable, and I'm going to call the same function. Got it? Whew. So I'm going to select all this, my make sortable. I'm adding that function here, make sortable, and I'm going to call make sortable with the name of my region. Just like this one, make sortable. We execute that JavaScript. We can tack it on to that one. Oh, except for, never mind. This is after refresh of that other. So I'm gonna create another one and make classic report sortable. So after refresh of the classic report, I'm going to execute some JavaScript code we're gonna make sortable with the name of the region. And make sure it's running on Fire and page load. It is. Save it. Run it. Go to the console to see if we have any errors. Scroll to our TRs. Look at that. They're sortable. Cookies to the bottom. And it does. Juice to the middle. And it does. You see how our TR kind of becomes a little bit smaller? There's ways to define the size of that TR so that it looks a little bit more like with the size that it had. I'm not gonna cover that right now, but just know that it's possible. All right, thank you for watching. I hope you find this useful.